On again. All right, so we are back. And talking about the right of association, and so, yeah, if you got a private association and so forth, you may be able to get away with various different forms of discrimination. But I think the lunch club one is kind of the exception because there's something missing out as far as that economic opportunity. Keep an eye on those because those are going to be very interesting. And I would say we're kind of moving into a period of time where governments are expanding rules as far as you cannot discriminate if you want to be in business offering variety of different services, and it runs the whole gamut. I mean, can a church discriminate with respect to who they perform marriages to? You think, yeah, because, I mean, not all churches, religious institutions, and so forth are going to have the exact same view of things. Hold off on that because we're going to get into some very, very important cases involving discrimination, the government, and cakes and flowers and photography. Yeah, you're like, what? That sounds interesting. Okay. No, do you not get cake? No. Yeah, it's kind of like, it's like, could somebody, I mean, Victoria, do you make cakes? Do you bake anything? You like to bake? Oh, what if Victoria decided she wanted to be a baker and she sets up a business and so it's open to the public, right? So can you discriminate? You don't want to? So if some guy came in and said, I want to celebrate Adolf Hitler's birthday and I want you to make a special Adolf Hitler birthday cake for me with swastikas and everything like that, could you decline that on the basis of any personal held views? You'll accidentally make a Hanukkah cake. Oops, sorry. Anyway, so, I mean, it's really weird that some of the most interesting and controversial cases that are taking place right now have to do with baking. I mean, which is really ironic because, like, we'll get into the details and so forth like that because it's kind of like, you know, you got to advertise. You're like, we got Hanukkah cakes over here. We've got neo-Nazi cakes over there. You know, just go through the whole thing and pick your cake thing. But sometimes folks will say, sometimes folks will say, we don't want there to be discriminatory things. So like if you were, you know, here we go. If we're talking about like the 1960s and so forth, you know, if you're an African American and you want to stay in a hotel, I mean, is it okay that some hotels are like, no, really, we don't want any of your kind here. You can go stay at some other hotel, right? Do you hate that? Yeah. So, I mean, there really was a book. It was called the Green Book. And African Americans had this, and so they would know going around the country, including places like Idaho, where African Americans would know that they wouldn't have any hassle or problem. They could stay in those places. That doesn't exist now. If you are open to the public as far as like a hotel and so forth, you can't discriminate on the basis of that. But there's other kinds of things. It's a really interesting thing as far as discrimination. When's it okay? When's it not okay? Generally, if it's open to the public as a business, it's not okay. But we'll see there's some particular things. I would say that if somebody was of the Jewish faith and they really didn't want to do a cake for Hitler's birthday, they probably could say that they were within bounds not to do that. Generally, if it's open to public customers and so forth coming in, then it'll fit more into the public. Okay, does that make sense? I'll give you a good example of how, like, in this area, it's been a long time, I think even before you were born, it used to be that, like, places that were open to the public would allow for smoking. Okay? I mean, it was like some places did, some places didn't. Then the rules changed and basically said no place that's open to the public can have smoking in it, smoke-free environment. But there were some people like, well, we want to smoke, we want to hang out and smoke together and, you know, have conversation and eat. Here's what they did. They formed private clubs, membership-only private clubs. Not that hard to get into that club, but that allowed them to be exempt from a rule that applied to private businesses that are open to the public. Do you see the distinction there? Yeah. Well, and it would be like I mean, if a bar is open to the public, anybody can come in, then they have to have the no smoking rules. Okay? So it would be a bunch of people that would sort of like own property together and have like their club. Does that sort of make sense? Okay. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of weird, but that's how you get over some of those rules and regulations, whether they're discriminatory law rules or maybe health and safety rules and so forth, to a degree. Okay? All right. Let's go to, let's get into some of these First Amendment religious cases. Oh, we got all kinds of interesting things. Here we go. Let's spell it out first. In your handout, if you look at there, I want you to look at, because there's going to be two component parts when we look at religious cases, plus all the stuff we talked about with respect to free speech, plus all the stuff we talked about with respect to peaceful assembly, and particularly the right of association. So, first of all, we've got this expression. I want you to write it down. It's called the separation of church and state. That expression actually comes out from Thomas Jefferson, author of the Declaration of Independence, third president of the United States. He was writing a letter to try and explain to somebody what was going on in the First Amendment, because we had two component parts, and this is very important. Two parts in the First Amendment that had a reference to religion. Jefferson tried to say, well, this is where the state, as in the government, is trying to be separated from what's going on in the religious sector. Okay, that helps a bit. A little history helps as well. What was the official religion of the United States of America when we were founded? There was none. Very good. You can write that down. In fact, that's an important thing to do. There was no official religion. So when we were coming up with the Constitution, there was no official religion. Why wasn't there official religion? Yeah? Exactly. If you went to different states and so forth, some of those states, many of them, actually did have official religions at one time. They may not have had it. Probably the best example comes to mind is Virginia, the first colony. The official religion was the Anglican Church, Church of England. And people living there in the colonial times would have to pay taxes to that church. And they would have to follow rules that were established by that church, like you can't work on Sundays and things like that. Okay, does that make sense? Well, not so much that one. Some of the folks that ended up in Massachusetts, they're like, I don't want to hang out with all those people in Virginia because they're a pain in the butt. Those are the people that we left. So you have like Quakers, they would establish themselves in Pennsylvania, and you had a variety of different groups that would establish various different colonies, and a lot of them then would establish their official church. So, make sure you have this down. The idea is we're not going to establish one official church in this country because that would just be too complicated and so forth. All right? But, so that's part of the First Amendment, right? Make sure you have that down. It's called the Establishment Clause. There shall be no establishment of religion. Now, the easiest way to interpret that is, okay, well, there's no official church that you have to follow the rules from. The government's not going to be backing up those rules. Even if those rules are made, you don't have to pay taxes to that church. But keep an eye on that, because there's going to be some very important Supreme Court cases on the Establishment Clause. When the Constitution says there'll be no establishment of religion, what exactly does that mean? Well, we're going to find out. One of the things, there it is. When we get to the case that took place in the Abingdon School District versus Schempp, the Schempp case. We'll get to that one in just a sec. Seriously. Okay. The other part of that religious component of the First Amendment is the Free Exercise Clause. Okay? That's going to be important as well. And that doesn't have so much to do with the state other than the state shall not prevent you from freely exercising your religion. Now, obviously, all of these are going to have some limitations. They're not absolute. I mean, the one that comes to mind is quite easy, and I've got a slide for it later on. If you're an Aztec and you want to practice your religion, freely exercise it, and so forth, can the government prevent you from raiding your neighbor, grabbing them and dragging them up to the top of the little pyramid that you built in your backyard and taking out a sharp object and ripping open their chest cavity and taking out their beating heart and offering it to the gods? You think the government can stop that? Really? What if the person's like, First Amendment, man, you are like preventing me from doing my religion. I'm going to do my Aztec religion on you, whether you're like, yeah, well, okay. You don't think so? Maybe. So anyway, so we've got these two parts that we look at, okay? And it can get kind of confusing. There's all kinds of really interesting cases. So as we go through here, I want you to learn how the cases are. And of course, there's going to be lovely, lovely gray area. Always some gray area. Okay? Now, as a matter of practice, and actually this is very interesting because a lot of, not all, but a lot of the key cases have had to do with public education situations. In fact, the first case, the Schempp case, this is the case that first gets our attention. Make sure you have this in your notes. This is the Schempp case. It's called Abington School District versus Schempp, 1963. Going back on what you have discovered already in here, who's the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court in 1963? He is. No. I think Thurgood Marshall actually was on the court. No, he was on it a little bit later than that. His name is Earl Warren. Now, he's just one name. The reason I mention that, Warren, is that he was part of the so-called Warren Court. Now, today, we would refer to it as like the Roberts Court, if it's quite distinctive and so forth, although it kind of comes and goes. And it's probably the Roberts Court is going to be maybe a little bit different when he first started as Chief Justice as opposed to, the next several years, but we'll find out. But what is distinctive about the Warren Court? Do they tend to be more judicially restrained or judicially active? Active, write that down, okay? So in the late 50s, going into the 60s, and a little bit into the 70s too, you see more activism on the part of the Supreme Court. And sometimes as we go through these various different cases, sometimes you'll go, I like that one, don't like that one, I like that one. So sometimes somebody's view on judicial activism versus judicial restraint might be colored by what's the outcome of the case. Okay? Well, let me tell you about the facts of the Schempp case. Here we go. Many parts of the country, you ready? Many parts of the country would start the school day, and when I mean school day, I mean public school day. Because in a lot of parts of the country, most parents would have their kids in the public schools. All right? It's kind of like Idaho, actually. There's not as many as a percentage of kids going to private schools, for the most part. You got a lot of kids in regular public schools. You got a fair number of kids in schools like this one, which is a public charter school, still public. If you go, like where I grew up in Northern Virginia, there was a fair number of kids who were attending like Catholic schools, and there was some other private schools. Okay? Do those rules, who has more flexibility as far as like setting rules that apply to their attendance and what goes on during the day? Private schools do. Yeah, they can kick you out. I'm like, why? You looked at me funny. Okay. Oh, well. Public schools a little bit different. Okay? So what you had in the early 1960s as a matter of practice in many parts of the country was schools would start with prayer. You can write that down. They would have a prayer. And the prayer would be pretty typical as to one that might be observed in the religious practices of most of the families attending that school. Do you understand? So particularly in a small community where most of the students were attending church with their families, maybe in the deep south, you got a lot of Protestant denominations and so forth. So the school would pick a prayer and they would start off with a prayer and so forth. Okay, got that? All right. So that was going on for years and years and years and years. And then, in this one particular case, a parent whose children the parent wasn't Christian, and the children that the parent was raising, he didn't want to necessarily be, raising them in a officially overt Christian environment. Does that make sense? I mean, positive, yes, but not necessarily officially overtly Christian. So they brought a lawsuit. Schempp brought a lawsuit against Abington School District, saying, are you ready, that the prayer in the school is a violation of their kids' First Amendment right against establishment of religion. The argument was that the government-run school was establishing a particular religious perspective by having as part of the day a prayer, a Christian prayer being read. Okay? Questions? Comments? How would you rule? Seems pretty reasonable. How so? From what perspective? Because the school was basically like, no, this is what everybody wants to do. We're going to do this. And the parent was like, well, no, this is public school. Public school. So you would say that who would win this case, the school district or the parent? Shemp. Okay. Now it was interesting because the school district said, you can write this down because this is a key part of it. The school district said, here's what, if your son, you don't want your son in the classroom while the prayer is going on, they can step out of the classroom during the prayer. We respect your wishes to not have, the indoctrination or what have you of the Christian prayer. Do you follow that? So they can step out in the hallway during the prayer. What do you think? Is that a reasonable alternative? You're shaking your head? No, that's not a reasonable alternative. Why do you say no? Interesting. That's an interesting perspective. That would be like most of the classroom, and then you'd have just the kids sitting all by themselves going, did I miss something? Well, they would, and what they had been doing up to that time is they would pick a prayer that would sort of fit most of the viewpoints within that majoritarian public school setting thing. Okay, go for it.
I say no because it's alienating and exclusionary.
Exclusionary? Are you saying that would make the kid feel like so hey, first grade class, here's Johnny. Okay, Johnny, time to go walk out in the hall. And it was like, why is Johnny walking out in the hall? Oh my God. Anyway, yes, go ahead, Victoria. Yeah, so that's what they're saying. This is a violation of the Establishment Clause. The government is establishing this. Even though this had been practiced for many, 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 many years, now the Supreme Court is looking at it and going, is this okay under our view of the way the Constitution should be written? Interesting question. Okay. Okay, so we'll get one at a time. Anybody else want to chime in on this before we get a decision by the court? Say multiple prayers. So we're going to take the next 20 minutes to run through all the possible. Maybe 20 minutes is. This is kind of how these things are. Okay. Yes, Chris. Okay. Chris.
The whole church thing, right? Like, if you're religious, you go to church on Sunday. Or within, I guess, like Christianity, what I understand. Why not just do it then? Like, why does it have to happen during school?
That's what Shemp was saying. Shemp was saying that this is something that should take place outside of school, in the public school setting. The school district is going, why are you wanting to kick out religion from the school setting? And then the Shemp would come back and go, we're not trying to kick out variety, not necessarily a student being able to exercise their religion and so forth, but we just don't want the school establishing as part of the day a particular prayer to a religion. That's what the arguments are for. Here than there. It's very interesting because, yeah, and Victoria, one thing that's very interesting as far as like the gray lines and so forth, is it okay, okay, hang on, whoa, shh, slow down, raise your hands, thank you very much. I'll give you an example just to kind of like put this into perspective. Is it okay if I tell you as a public school teacher, it is right to tell the truth and it is wrong to be dishonest? Is that okay? Yes, I mean that's sort of like, somebody would go, that's an ethics, moral-based kind of thing. Could I say, based on your sense of it, that it is right to tell the truth and wrong to lie because that is offensive to God? You're like, because then you bring in the religious component. So it's fascinating. Good luck trying to untangle basic, like, do good and do right principles from religious context, which is, like, imbued in everything and so forth. It's easier for me because I've taught in a public school for a long, long time. So when I tell you, you need to do right, I don't need to necessarily make a specific religious reference. If a public school teacher had personally a religious perspective and so forth, they could have that, but they just couldn't necessarily announce it. I mean, you guys kind of already know where the Supreme Court's going to be going on this case, don't you? Because do we start off with a prayer at the beginning of the school? No, there's a reason for that. 1963. Shemp.
Once again, like what Victoria was saying in rebuttal to Connor, it's using taxpayer money for the school system, for almost salaries or within that government public school.
Okay. Let me ask you this.
Which is
Could we use taxpayer money, government school, to promote good behavior and kindness?
yeah.
What is that religion?
And that's an interesting thing. Yeah. Can you advocate something positive without necessarily being into that? Yeah. So, I mean, it does make it a little bit muddy. We'll get to that. We're going to get to that case. We're going to get to that one. All right, here we go. So, how many of you guys, if you were around on the Supreme Court in 1963, you would say, I'm sorry, Shemp, the school is offering you reasonable alternatives and so forth. We're not going to tell them that they can't do the prayer at the beginning of the school. How many of you guys would rule in favor of Abington School District? Okay. How many of you guys would rule in favor of Shemp, the parents? Okay. Write it down. Shemp won. Okay. It was a very, very important case. It was fascinating, though, because within many communities in this country, there was a revulsion. In fact, people would characterize that as the day that the United States Supreme Court kicked God out of the public schools. That was how it was characterized. Now, it's an interesting thing because was there going to be prayer in the public schools organized by the schools from that point on? No. Could students carry out their religious beliefs and so forth in the school? Because of what part of the First Amendment? Free exercise clause. It's kind of right in there, okay? So, I mean, it's like, but the free exercise clause of the religion, okay? So, when, where, when, how can Tiny Tim pray in a public school? This one, interesting. Take a look at the cartoon here. Is this a perspective of they agree with the Shem case or disagree with the Shem case? You were heard saying, God bless us everyone within 50 feet of a public school. Shame on you, Tiny Tim. And notice which particular advocacy group with respect to civil liberties and amendments, civil rights and so forth, is being portrayed in this particular thing. American Civil Liberties Union, okay? Would the ACLU be in favor of the Shem case or against it? They would be in favor of the Shem case as far as, like, yeah, I mean, if you want to have people advocating for religious opportunities and so forth in a school, there's other organizations, but the ACLU is not going to be on that particular thing. They would say it was good that Shemp was able to win that case because that's not the job of the public schools. The job of the public schools is to teach, and the job of churches and religious organizations is to do all that outside of the public school sector. Okay? How about the Pledge of Allegiance? Yes. This is ridiculous. Go ahead and take a look at that first, and then we'll get into the case. Yes. Bart Simpson, the Pledge of Allegiance does not end with Hail Satan. Okay. Right? Okay. Go ahead and write this down. The Pledge of Allegiance. This is a fascinating one because this, as long as I've been teaching, and there's not much time left, the Pledge of Allegiance is a situation that has not been clearly resolved by the Supreme Court. Although, we'll give you the facts here. Idaho, like some other states in the country, requires, as part of the day, in public schools that the Pledge of Allegiance there would be an opportunity to recite the Pledge of Allegiance. Just curious. What do you guys have first period on A days? Math? Do you do the Pledge of Allegiance? Violation of state law. What about on B days? You do. Miss Rao does it. Okay. Yeah, and I do that. I do that as well with my first period classes and so forth. And it's fascinating, just as a matter of practice, if somebody wants to stand up and start screaming during the Pledge of Allegiance, not okay. If they want to sit, I suppose they can. If they don't want to say it, yeah, they don't have to say it. I'm not going to. It's the opportunity, right? So I will say to be respectful. And I think years ago, yeah, it was fascinating because some years, once upon a time, we used to have exchange students. And I can remember, like, some of the classes, some of my first period classes, it would be like, a third of the students are exchange students, and they would be the only ones doing the Pledge of Allegiance. They were like, this is an opportunity to practice the English language. So here's the deal. Let's take a look. We've got the Pledge of Allegiance right up there in case you don't remember it. I pledge allegiance to the flag. Okay? Raise your hand as soon as you see a potential First Amendment separation of church and state issue arising. This shouldn't take long. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, ding, 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 indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Actually, it was interesting. Historically, the under God part was added to the Pledge of Allegiance, I want to say in the 1950s during the Cold War, when the godless communists, when the Soviet Union and so forth, when they were on the other side. And so our country was like, yeah, we're for capitalism and God, and let's get that in there. And so that became part of the Pledge of Allegiance. All right, so here's the deal. Write this down. There was a man. Here's the case. Because you can be like, wonder what did the Supreme Court rule? There was a man, a father. Don't ask me how that happens. That's for health class. Okay? There was a father of I think it was a son, and he was in the public schools. And the father was like, hey, I'm going to follow like the Shemp, precedent, right? This is not for the public school to be having the government to be advocating a religious belief under God. God is a religious figure. Okay, that's quite clear. And so the father brought a case saying, don't do that. That's a violation of the Establishment Clause. The government, public schools are trying to establish a particular point of view. Excuse me, somebody raise your hand. What particular religious point of view are you establishing, arguably, with an under God?
Christian, because
Hold on. Hold on, I'm going to work with one person right now. Shh. Is Christian a one God religion?
It's singular and it is capitalized.
Okay.
So, and since it is capitalized, it is a common noun, and therefore the name of the person God,
Okay.
God.
Okay, very good. Raise your hand if you can identify any other religions that have a singular God. Yes? Judaism. Any other ones? Islam, very good. Right? I mean, those are the three main monotheistic religions. If somebody was to say, okay, somebody might come along, and this didn't happen, but if a school district came along and said, okay, right, we're being too exclusive on monotheism and so forth, then maybe they could extend it to under God or gods, if that is the case, right? Go into some polytheism. Or like any other deities and particular religious belief systems that are prevalent to the particular people that you have. Shh. Okay, MK has the floor. MK has the floor. Or under no God. I mean, literally, I suppose you could make this like massive thing, and the students are like, especially, shh, please, ladies, gentlemen, other people who are talking that don't fit in those first two categories. Ladies, gentlemen, and other people that don't fit in those first two categories because they're still talking. I mean, you really could make this a mouthful, and that kind of defeats the purpose, maybe. I mean, my goodness, that could go on and on and on and on and on. Yes? Yeah, agnostic is uncertainty, right? Agnostic is uncertainty. Atheism is certainty that there is no God. Okay? So which brings up a really bad joke. Okay, let me try and remember exactly before I tell this, because otherwise you're going to be like, oh, you totally messed it up. Okay? Oh. What is, it's coming. It'll happen to you too someday. What do you call, okay, somebody who has a reading disability, it's a real thing, like where you get the letters switched around and so forth, dyslexia, thank you very much. What do you call somebody who is an agnostic dyslexic? Somebody who's not sure about the existence of dog. Did you like that one? That was simple. It took me a while to think about that one, but yeah. Dog. There we go. Dog. Everyone knows cats are in charge of the universe anyway, but so, what? Anyway, so here's the deal.
I love my dog.
I'm just curious. All right, here we go. You guys have heard some discussion and so forth on this thing, which, somebody can be like, hey, it's no big deal. I mean, is the religious component part, is it a big part? Is it too much? Is it just a de minimis part? Is it too disruptive? Is this like a prayer? I mean, what is this? Should we get straight to a ruling? You're on the Supreme Court. If this case were to come to you ready? How many of you would find that the Pledge of Allegiance, a requirement that the state allow for the Pledge of Allegiance to be done, would be a violation of the Constitution, First Amendment, Establishment Clause? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, how many of you guys would say, yeah, well, no. I mean, we're talking about if the government organizes it, as opposed to if somebody does it themselves. How many of you guys would say it doesn't rise to the level of being a violation of the Establishment Clause, it's not that big of a deal, and so forth? Well, you just voted the other way on the other one. So it's not a violation of the Establishment Clause.
I heard it's not that big of a deal.
Yeah, but it's not a violation of the Establishment Clause. In other words, this... Okay, I know, you voted on that way, the earlier one. So how many of you guys vote in favor of the school, the state, that wants to have that in there? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Get a little quick vote in here. 5, and then how many of you guys didn't vote on this? Several of you guys didn't vote on that one. All right, so what was the ruling in the Supreme Court? I already told you. Write this down. They didn't rule on it. Here's the deal. You're going to be like, really? No, you guys can't anticipate this. Here's the deal. The case went up, bit by bit by bit by bit, all the way to the Supreme Court. And now the Supreme Court, remember we talked about jurisdictions? The Supreme Court has to be looking and go, do we have jurisdiction over this case? Well, if they do have do they have jurisdiction over a case dealing with the First Amendment and like the Pledge of Allegiance? I think so. But here's another question they have to ask. Do the people bringing the lawsuit have standing? As in, do they have the right to bring the lawsuit? Now, I just told you that it was the kid's father, right? But I didn't tell you this. The kid's father and the kid's mother were divorced. And as part of the divorce decree by the court, the mother had full custodial rights. Only the mother could have brought that particular type of suit. He did not have standing. The court kicked the case out of the court without making a ruling on the case. And everyone was like, thanks a lot. We're waiting for a ruling. Yeah. So, absent a ruling, here we go. Here's the deal. Absent a ruling from the Supreme Court finding the Pledge of Allegiance as being a violation of the Establishment Clause of the Constitution, can states like Idaho and others still have that as part of their requirements? Yeah, okay, because it hasn't been thrown out. So, do you think the modern court is going to rule that it's unconstitutional? I'm looking at the current makeup of it. I kind of doubt it. Yeah. Who knows? Who knows? All right. Now, I want you to write this down. It's called the Lemon Test, and it doesn't have to do about whether you buy cars that necessarily break down, but it has to do with a case. There you can see it in your notes, Lemon versus Kurtzman. which was a 1971 case, 8 years after the Schempp case, because all these different things are popping up all over the country, and people are like, what do we do? You know, everyone wants to get some guidance on when is something unconstitutional with respect to religion and when is it okay. All right, you ready? And so the Supreme Court in that case came up with a 3-part test. And I want you guys to use it as we move forward in a whole variety of interesting scenarios. You ready? And it actually spells it out very well right here. Now notice this is government law or government action. If you guys want to do something in your own private time and your own private property and so forth, that's not what's applying here. Because the First Amendment says the government, as in Congress, shall not establish a religion. Or the government shall not impede whatever with the free exercise of religion. So we're looking at the government's thing. That make sense? So, first, the government's decision, the government's rules, have to have, 1, a secular purpose. Raise your hand if you can define the word secular. Very good. Non-religious. Okay? How about this one? Easy. If the North Star wanted to have something that would promote good behavior, is that okay? Is that a non-secular purpose? Is that a secular purpose? Excuse me. Yes, right? If North Star wanted to have something that would promote Christian or Jewish or Islamic behavior, no. Okay? Second one, okay, because we're going to have actually 3 different parts here, because sometimes it's not always dispositive, the very first one. Sometimes you're like, I'm not so sure about that one. That might work, but let's go a little bit further. Second part is the primary effect doesn't advance or inhibit religion. Okay, the primary effect does not advance or inhibit religion. I'll give you an easy one here. We have school, public school. This year we have it on 4 days a week. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Is establishing those days as the school days, does that have a secular purpose? Yeah, secular legislative purpose. Your job is to get an education. Da, 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 da. Does it advance or inhibit in a big way the religious beliefs of the people who are attending public school? No. How about this? What if we changed it to, we're going to have school on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday? Would that potentially have an inhibiting impact? Arguably, because you could have a number of students and so forth who would be impaired with their education. Yeah, would be impaired with their education by having school on that day. Does that make sense? Does that kind of make sense? That's kind of an easy one. I know, like, for example, in what is the, you guys are aware, what is the predominant day that Islamic religious worship takes place? The day of the week. Fridays. It's interesting because, like, I want to say in the Dearborn, Michigan, near Detroit, there's a lot of folks who have come to this country and live in this country, U.S. citizens, who are Muslim. And I'm not positive, but I wouldn't be surprised if the public school week was such that it would not impair, and so maybe they don't have school on Friday and so forth. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. Now, we have the third one, just in case we don't get it settled after the first 2. That the law doesn't result in an excessive government entanglement with religion. It's not too much sort of like, it's not too entangled with it. So, if it's constitutional, it has to pass 1, 2, 3. If it fails one or more of those, ding, 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 Supreme Court says, it's an unconstitutional rule or law. You got that? So do you have that written down? You got the lemon test? Because we're going to be using this. In fact, by the end of this part, I don't know if we'll get to it today. In fact, I don't think so. We'll be actually having, I came up with a really wacky scenario having to do with pagans. You're like, what? Anyway, but we'll get to that as we go through it. Let's give you some practice. All right, here we go. 10 Commandments in courthouses cases. Write this down. 10 Commandments in courthouses cases. There's actually 2 cases that went to the United States Supreme Court dealing with 2 different locations, both of them courthouses, both of them had in those courthouses the 10 Commandments. All right, here's the facts of the case, of the first case. In a county courthouse, for many, 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 many years, they had a variety of different rules, codes from history, Hammurabi's code, like an eye for an eye and things like that and so forth. And that was part of like a display of like the history of justice. And of course, some of the justice was, religious, divine justice and so forth. Okay, that was in the courthouse. Somebody came in and said, I'm feeling like this is a public building, public trials, and I'm not feeling too good about the fact that this is advancing a particular point of view. The 10 Commandments, what religion or religions are the 10 Commandments in? Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. Yeah, the 10 Commandments. All the main monotheistic religions from the Middle East there. Okay? So, some of them you're like, don't commit adultery. Don't commit adultery. Is that specific to a particular religious point of view? Don't cheat. Okay? How about you shall have no other God before you? That's kind of a religious context and so forth. Okay? You got that? Now, there are two cases. One of them started out that way. The other case, it had the 10 Commandments, and as soon as a lawsuit came down, the courthouse decided, okay, let's get a whole bunch of different other examples of laws from history. Does that make sense? So both of them ultimately came to the Supreme Court. How are you going to rule? What else do you want to know? It's public. Oh, let's go back. Actually, let's go ahead and do this. Having a 10 Commandments in a court, that's a decision by the court to have, the courthouse to have that in there. Does it have a secular purpose? Raise your hand if you can give an argument that that is a secular purpose. Yes. It's history, okay? It fits history. It's promoting good behavior. A lot of modern Western values come from that. Now remember some of the other facts I mentioned. Okay, Victoria, was it just that one particular piece of history, or were there other pieces of history there? Yeah. And actually, this is important because you're like, what difference does it make if they started out with a whole bunch of things versus if they're looking around going, okay, we're going to do like those guys did, and then they add a bunch of things later on. As it turns out, it's going to make all the difference. Okay, so arguably, some people could say it just has to do with justice. Okay? By putting the 10 Commandments there, is there an argument that maybe that doesn't have a secular purpose?
I'd say,
And the first part of the 10 Commandments is very, very much like no other gods before you, and very focused on the relationship between the humans and God. The other parts are like don't cheat, don't steal, things like that, which are, you could look at those and go generic, although it is, God says, don't do this. So if I told you, don't steal, are you guys cool with that? Even if I was a public school teacher, I said, don't steal because God doesn't want you to do that. Your head's going to explode. Yeah. Yes, go ahead. Okay, hold on. Let's go through the analysis. If arguably you can say, well, maybe that's a secular purpose, historical, it's judicial thing and so forth, does the primary effect of having the 10 Commandments and those other things in there advance or inhibit religion? Does it depend literally on how big the letters are and how easy it is to see on the walls? Look at all this stuff that I have on my walls here. Is this educational? Am I advancing any particular point of view? Is there anything that could be potentially suspect? Am I advancing Islam because I've got the Taj Mahal here? Am I advancing Christianity because we've got the Church of the Holy Sepulchre there? Am I advancing Roman paganism because I've got the Colosseum right there? Okay, fine. Oh, right here. This one's better. The Temple of Athena in Athens. Am I advancing that? Or does it all just sort of fit into this big, huge, massive cultural, historical overload? Communism! Am I advancing communism by having communism up there?
Yeah!
No, I'm not. Yeah, it's like, so,
And you have all of the other,
I don't have everything. It's impossible to have everything.
but technically you can't choose.
Yeah, it's like, does it, anybody have any things that's like, it's too much entanglement and so forth? Okay? Maybe. Maybe. Depends on the court. Write this down. On the Ten Commandments cases. You ready? Write this down. This one came out, I want to say, I don't have the specific date on it, but I want to say like maybe 8 or 10 years ago. So it's been a while. Okay, you ready? The Supreme Court ruled in both cases 5-4. On the one courthouse with the Ten Commandments in it and a whole bunch of other stuff, and in another courthouse with the Ten Commandments with a whole bunch of other stuff in. And the Supreme Court said, it's okay and it's not okay. This was a real mess. The one justice who was consistent in saying, in his own opinion, in one instance, the one where it was like they had all those examples there for all those years, he's like, it's kind of part of this historical, judicial kind of a thing, and that was with the intent, and so that's cool. 5-4. Now, this is after Warren. Warren has already gone. Okay? I want to say it was Justice Kennedy, but you're not going to have to necessarily know all the names on that one. Okay? So this was, like I say, this was like 8 or 9 years ago. On the other case, they said, no, it's too much government entanglement. It looks like the intent of the courthouse was to add all that other stuff to get around it. And you're like, oh, please help us. Give us some clear direction, Supreme Court. When is it okay? When is it not okay? Because what it seemed to be saying was, depends on when you put the stuff in there. Because it looked like the intent of the courthouses was different, but the result was kind of the same. Sorry, ladies and gentlemen, make a note. Sometimes the Supreme Court does not always give you the clearest direction on what is okay and not okay. You understand that? And actually, and who could you, because there were 4 justices that said, in both cases, it was not okay. And there were 4 justices in both cases that said it was fine. There was one justice that made up the majority. In one case, he said it was fine, and the other case, he said it was not okay. Sorry, everyone looks at me confused like every year when I go through these ones, and I'm sorry, that's part of what you need to know. Sometimes it gets a little confusing, and you don't always have the absolute clarity of, is it going to be okay? So when you go into, like this one, there was a big hoo-la-la. Write this down. The 10 Commandments in Julia Davis Park in Boise, Idaho. Okay? Oh, yeah. Because the folks who were in charge of Julia Davis Park, is that public or private? Public. Okay? Who's responsible for the public park at Julia Davis? Boise City Council. Okay? So Boise City Council is looking and they're going, oh my gosh, what do we have to do? We've got this 10 Commandments plaque that's located, it was located right near Capitol Bridge. Okay? So if you're familiar with like where the library is and Anne Frank Human Rights Memorial and so forth, this would be just a little bit to the east. Okay? Near the band shell. If you know where the band shell is. Seriously? Okay. So the interesting thing about these tablets were placed around the country as part of a movie promotion. Guess what movie was being promoted? The 10 Commandments. Yeah, exactly. The 10 Commandments. One of those like 1950s, 60s epic, religious dramas. It had Charlton Heston in it. And, this, I won't say computer generated, but they had all these sci-fi effects. So like when Moses, parted the Red Sea and so forth, it was really big, hullabaloo and everything like that. So they put them in there. And of course, this is before the Shemp case, and it was there, and everything's kind of cool and so forth. Here's what actually prompted Boise City Council to get nervous about it. No. Guess who they thought was going to show up and demand that they have a right to establish one of their religious objects for permanent display in Julia Davis Park? I'll give you a clue. We've run into these guys before. No, it's not the Nazis. No. Don't have to go too far back, do we? Up, these guys. The Fred Phelps Westboro Baptist guys. And the Boise City Council was like, we're going to have to allow these guys. And other people are like, no, I don't think you need to allow these guys to be able to set up some permanent thing right next to the Ten Commandments. So they had this argument going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. What should they do about the Ten Commandments? Does this meet with the Lemon case? Does it have a secular purpose to have the Ten Commandments located in your park? It has some difficulties in the first instance. There we go. It was part of a movie promotion. There we go. It's part of a movie promotion. So it's not necessary. Does it, number two, does it pass that one? Promoting economic growth at the time? Yes? Now, when can you look at it? Can you look at it afresh, as in 30 or 40 years after that movie came out? Because it would be a continual thing. If it was a temporary display, then maybe you could focus more on the commercial aspects. Yes? So, this is what the Boise City Council decided to do. Yes, go ahead. If you put a flower bed around it, does that make it like a horticultural exhibit? Yeah. Okay, so here's it. Boise City Council, you can write this down. Boise City Council decided they didn't want a lawsuit, they didn't want the Fred Phelps to have any opening, they just wanted to move on. And as it turns out, there was a private property owner not too far from that location that said, we'll happily take that.
Oh, is that like the same thing with Table Rock?
Hold on, we're going to get to that later. Hold on. Hold on. Let's finish this one first. Shh. Hold on. Just wait. Hold on. Back on this one. Who can put the Ten Commandments on their private property? And everyone goes, well, that fits. It was a church that did it. And so one of the downtown churches not too far from the Capitol building now has this very same Ten Commandments plaque that used to be in Julie Davis Park. Got it? So yeah, it's like a big stone. I want to say it's like about that tall. Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty good sized thing. Write this down. You guys are like on the same page with me. Anne Frank Human Rights Memorial Park in Boise. It's right near, not too far from Julie Davis, right near the library, right along the Greenbelt there. When I was teaching at Capitol High School, some of the students were involved in helping raise money and promote, and they have it there. Okay? What is in Anne Frank Human Rights Memorial? Well, all kinds of various different messages promoting human rights. You've even got some Dr. Seuss. Unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not. It's from the Lorax, exactly. Put this down, though. This was interesting. The thorax, no, the Lorax. The Truffulas, who speaks for the trees? They have there, if you've ever been there, you know what I'm talking about. It's beautiful, walk around, it's like got all kinds of very like contemplative sections. What's that? Yeah, and then they raise money to get it undefaced. Okay? So, I mean, there's been a lot of money to be raised. Put this down, though. It's an interesting collection of literary things promoting human rights. Anne Frank's words herself promoting human rights and so forth, memorializing her. And also religious scripture from a variety of different religious texts, as well as religious leaders. Like Gandhi, I think, is quoted there. Martin Luther King Jr. is quoted there, and so forth. Is that, that's on public property, is that a violation of the Lemon Test? Is that, let's go back to the Lemon Test. Is it promote, is having something promoting human rights a secular purpose? Human rights? Yes, you got to understand what's secular. Secular means non-religious. Human rights, check. Does it primarily inhibit or advance a particular religion? Is there religious quotes in that display? Yes. But it, fitting there. So this is fascinating. You're like, you get this mixture of religion and Dr. Seuss and all kinds of stuff. And does it result in excessive government entanglement? How many guys would say that the Anne Frank Human Rights Memorial is a violation of the First Amendment and needs to be adjusted or altered because of that? How many guys are like, that's cool? It passed constitutional muster. Okay, here we go, Table Rock. All right, here we go. This one is interesting. Okay, this is interesting. Okay, in Boise, Table Rock Park, which is really a nice place to walk around just above the old penitentiary. It's really pretty there. There is a cross. It's been there for quite some time. And when it was placed there, it was on public land. When it was placed there on public land, would it have met the lemon test at that time? No. Probably not, because that is pretty clearly a religious a symbol. Here's what happened, though. Okay? This is a little history for you. Because you're like, wait a minute, Mr. Hansen just said it didn't pass the lemon test at the time that it was placed there. And it was like back in the 50s? Hold on. It was back in the 50s. Hold on. It's back in the 50s. And it is still there. So something must have happened. All right, here's the deal. When these cases started coming out in the Supreme Court, the Schempp case and so forth, folks are looking around going, oh, this could be an issue. So the public land on the top of Table Rock, part of it was put up for sale. Guess which part? The part right underneath the cross. I mean, it's a fairly small thing. It's probably about, it couldn't be any bigger than this classroom. In fact, it's probably a little bit smaller. Okay? Yeah, it's very small. And it was put up for a public auction. Now let me throw this out to you. Putting up a little bit of land for a public sale, is that a violation of the lemon test? Does it have a secular purpose to sell a little tiny piece of land? It's selling, I mean, who else is going to buy that land? The group that placed it there was a JC's. It's a private group. Okay? Is there excessive entanglement? Does it seem to advance or inhibit one religion or another? How many guys would say, under the lemon test, the cross, the Table Rock cross fails? How many guys would say, under the lemon test, it's okay? Well, here's the deal. Write this down. It never went to court. And here's the reason why. Because when people started talking about whether or not it would pass the lemon test, that discussion was about 10 years ago. And the lawyers looked around and they said, well, you know what? The sale of the land took place like 30, 40 years ago. And here's the deal. Here's what you need to know. If you can bring a lawsuit, you have to bring it within a certain time frame, and it wasn't brought within a certain time frame, so therefore, the statute of limitations was over, no case could be brought, it's done. It's done. Okay? The land is privately owned. You're too slow if you wanted to object to it. What's that? I don't know that that's going to be. I don't know that's going to be. Next time we do Christmas display cases. Yes, that'll be fun. All right, wipe her down, and you guys are free to go.